In this video, we're going to look at the number one skill that I think all writers need to develop, and this includes non-fiction writers as well as fiction writers. So if you've got some friends who are non-fiction writers, you should send them in the direction of this video. Before we get started, if you want to get an email with a time-stamped overview of every video as I release it, then head over to my website, which is at deliberate-practice.com, and sign up there for my email list. There's other content at the website, plus in the months and weeks upcoming, I'm going to be adding some thank you goodies for signing up and also some email subscriber only content. So do go over there and do that. And let me start this video with a story, which is a bit meta in inverted commas or in brackets, however you want to do it. Back in 2013, I was in central London and I was going to pick up some theatre tickets that my wife had booked for me and her and our kids, who were quite young at the time. We were going to see The Lion King before we moved out of London and we moved 2 hours west. It was a sunny day, so I decided to walk the mile or so to Waterstones Piccadilly from the theatre box office and just have a wander around. If you don't know, the Waterstones in Piccadilly in London is a 6 or 7 story store. It's got literally tens of thousands of books in it. It's got places where you can sit and have coffee and browse through books. Something that I used to do back in the day when I used to have time to do that. Kids coming along does affect that kind of thing. Anyway, as I got there though, I wondered what was happening, because it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and there was a queue stretching down Piccadilly as far as I could see. So that's probably over a mile long, probably not quite that far, but I just couldn't see the end of this queue, all the way down the pavement, completely baffled and perplexed by this. First, before I saw the enormity of the queue, I thought there was a bomb scare or a fire alarm, because so many people were out on the pavement in front of Waterstones and as I was approaching it, behind them. And these people were mostly young, maybe 65% female, and they're kind of alternative looking, a bit gothic. My 20-year-old son, when I described what people were wearing, said they sound like goths and emos. I've no idea what an emo is. Maybe you do. But they were kind of alternative looking, although there were very ordinary, normal people in their 30s and 40s there again, maybe 65-70% female. Now, if I'd 2020 foresight, I'd have taken some pictures of all this, because this is a really interesting story, and they would have really helped with helping you make visual connections to the story. The only pictures that exist are on the stock photo sites like Getty and Shutterstock. That's the one I was thinking of. And I didn't want to spend 250 quid on a photo for a video, and nor did I want to take a screen capture of it and post it here, because both of those places can be very diligent about pursuing what they see as copyright infringement. But you can find some of those pictures and go and look at them, and you'll see what I mean about the kind of people who were queuing up. When I went into the store, I found out that there was an author that they were there to see. And I found out yesterday when I was prepping this video that the queuing actually started at 5 a.m. in the morning, which at the time I didn't know. All I knew was there was a big queue. I had no idea how long people had been there, and no idea that on a March morning people had got there at 5 a.m. in the morning. So you're probably wondering, who was this mystery author they were there to see? Well, Stephen King famously said about this author that she couldn't write her way out of a paper bag. And you probably know that quote, and I'm talking about Stephenie Meyer, the author of the Twilight Saga, and she was there to sign one of the books from the saga called The Host, and all these people were waiting there to come in at 6 o'clock, get books autographed, maybe have a picture taken with Stephenie, and move on from there. And it's a really important lesson, because while she's not the greatest prose writer, and I'll just say Twilight has absolutely zero appeal to me, and she won't be upset by that because I'm not her target demographic. And you can go to Amazon, choose the first Twilight book and just read the sample, and you see what I mean. She's not the greatest prose writer in the world, But despite that, she wrote a story that appealed to millions upon millions of readers. And possibly some of those readers are in that kind of demographic of people who don't read very much, because as a generalization, the younger generations don't read as much as older generations do. Partly that's because of the explosion in visual media and stuff, but it's just a truism, and while it's sad, it's true. And this leads us on to the fact that story is the number one skill that all writers should develop. And this story goes further. To prove that those stories had legs, another author wrote fan fiction and used the Twilight characters in spicy fan fiction, and she got such attention for that she deleted them from, I think it was on Wattpad. You can Google this afterwards and find out if you want to. So she deleted those initial stories because she got such a positive reaction. She renamed the characters when it was getting all this attention, and then she got a publishing deal. I think she self-published first, and then the books were picked up by a major publisher. And that was 50 Shades of Grey, and that sold even more than Twilight. So that shows you the importance of a story that resonates with a particular audience, because E.L. James is by no shades of the imagination, pun not intended, what you would call a good writer of prose. Her prose is really ordinary, and for most people, if they wrote prose like that, they probably would want to heavily edit it. But having said that, I think 50 Shades of Grey is in the top 5 best-selling fiction books of all time. And in that first 2 years that it was around, it sold an absolute shed load. And talking about stories having legs and stuff, I have a piece of software called Publisher Rocket, where you can enter an author's name or a book name, and you can type it into the software, and it will give you an estimation of how well those books are selling at this point in time based on the Amazon bestseller ranks. And you can choose for Amazon US or Amazon UK, Amazon... I'm trying to think what others... They've recently added 3 or 4 other stores, so you can see some other stores. I know they've got Germany. I think they've now got Canada and a couple of others. But I just looked in the Amazon US, and with paperback... stroke ebook stroke Audible, currently this month those stories are on track to gross $400,000-$500,000 just in the US alone. And with my music book sales, I find with Amazon that my music book sales in the US are about 75 to 80% of sales at Amazon worldwide. So if that figure holds true, then, and if the books and audiobooks and ebooks are going to make $500,000 this month, then there's probably another maybe $150,000 worth of royalties coming from those other Amazon stores. So this is, I think the first Twilight book was released around 2008. So this is getting on for 17, 18 years afterwards. It's still selling lots, just like Harry Potter, a new audience is finding them. So the fact that Stephenie Meyer is not the best writer in the world doesn't stop those stories appealing to a new generation of readers. And that's the lesson. If you write a good story, you've got much more chance of engaging with readers than if your story is average. Now, I'm just going to talk very briefly about why story is the number one skill that writers should develop. Story is how we see the world. There's a guy called Will Storr, and I didn't spell his name wrongly. I think my Keynote software auto-corrected his surname, S-T-O-R-R, to Storr. But he's written a book called The Science of Storytelling. I took his seminar at The Guardian in London 2 or 3 years before he released the book. And basically, he talks about the neuroscience of story. And so, for example, all of the brain paths that come from our senses, so from our eyes, from our ears, nose, the touch sensors, and smell, they all go into a part of the brain that translate them into story before it goes to the analytical part of the brain. So when we get data, even though we don't know it, our brains are automatically converting the data that we're getting into story. So story is how we see things. Definitely read Will's book, The Science of Story. You can get it. It's either Science of Story or Science of Storytelling. You can get it cheaply on Amazon. You get a Kindle version. It will change how you see story if you've not already had this revelation. And a good story, poorly told, and by poorly told I mean not great prose, perhaps characterizations are a little flat, but a good story poorly told will always outperform a poor story where the prose is exemplary, but if nothing happens and the story doesn't go anywhere, having great prose won't do anything, because people will look at it and read it and just go, well, nothing happens. But if you can tell a good story, even poorly, that moves people, well, you're going to hit pay dirt. And obviously, if you can tell a good story and you can tell it well, that's what we should be striving for. But most people work on their writing skills before they work on their story skills. And I think story skills are the first thing all writers should work on. And that's for whatever level of writer you are. Your story sense is something that you must always be working on and be developing on. Fortunately, we've got a slew of things that we can use to develop that story sense, and I'm going to talk how to build your story sense. This is one way of doing it. This is not the only way. There are other ways of doing it, but I wanted to present you with a way that you could take away today and start working on it today if you were so motivated to do so. So the first thing you need to do is choose a story model that resonates with you. There are dozens of story models out there. You've heard some of them: Save the Cat, The Hero's Journey, Dan Harmon's Story Circle, Dan Wells' 7-point story structure, John Truby in his 22-point structure. There's a guy called Eric Edson has written a book called The 23 Actions Every Hero Should something like that. If you search for Eric Edson or 22 Actions, that's quite an interesting model. There's more. There's Robert McKee's story. And the thing about these story models is they are how one person views story. And what you'll find as you look at some of those is you'll go, well, that one, yeah, I don't really agree with that. So, for example, I never got the buzz about Robert McKee and his book Story. I read it and it was okay, but it didn't leave me with a motivation to go and explore his model much further or do anything with it. Whereas when I read Chris Vogler's The Writer's Journey, and there were reasons for this too, that really resonated me, and that's why that's the story model that I tend to veer towards when I'm using a story model. But you have to find the one that resonates most with you. And yes, if you're reasonably new to writing and you don't know much about story models, you will need to do a bit of work on that. But once you've done that and you've chosen one that you think, this resonates with me the most, then start with that. And then what you do is you pick 50 films to analyze. Now, there's a couple of criteria that you need to bear in mind when you pick these 50 films. The first one is they've got to be films that you like. And I've written like, I should have written a stronger word. Films that you love would be better than films that you like. Films that you would watch again, that you've already watched several times over, that if someone says to you, can you recommend me, I know you like this kind of film, can you recommend me 4 or 5 like this, that you can easily go off the top of your head, yeah, you should watch this, 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 and this. And if they say why, you'll be able to tell them. And when you do it, if you can feel yourself lighting up with energy and passion, then those are the kind of films that you want. But ideally, we also want films that do that, but also did well at the box office. So that and the reason for that is that's that's empirical data that tells us that you weren't the only one in the world that really enjoyed that film. Because unless you want to write films that don't really appeal to many people, this is the best way to try and create stories or understand stories that you like, that you would like to write, but that also a good number of other people also like those stories. Now, the question you're probably asking is, why choose films to analyze? We're fiction writers. Why don't we choose books? There are several reasons. The first one is films are reasonably quick to consume and then analyze. Most films are like 2 hours long. There aren't many films much longer in the 3 hour mark. There are some. But if you take those over even like a 80, 90,000 word modern contemporary thriller like a Jack Reacher book or something like that, they're going to be 300-400 pages, and depending on how fast you read, that might be 5, 6, 7 hours. So there's a lot of reading time, and it's also much easier to navigate back through films to re-look at sequences than it is to do the same kind of thing with books. You could do it with books. I think films are a better medium to analyze, because what we're looking for is the essence of story. We're not looking at this point at how we translate story to the written page. Another reason to choose films is it's very quick and easy to get box office figures that tell us how popular or otherwise the films we're thinking of analysing are. Those figures are much less available for books. So I could tell you I really like a fantasy writer called Guy Gavriel Kay. I've got zero idea how many copies he sells. I've tried analysing with the aforementioned software publisher Rocket, and he doesn't seem to be selling that many copies compared to, say, someone like Brandon Sanderson or the current vogue in fantasy. And I've never read any of these, so don't for a moment think I'm recommending these. There's kind of like the romantasy, I think it is the name of the subgenre. It's kind of like a cross between fantasy with some kind of spicy romance. And interestingly, I saw a thing the other week, an article, where it said best-selling book trends will go for 4 to 5 years and then they'll fizzle away. And the example it used was 50 Shades of Grey that we talked about, and that gave rise to like a subgenre, spicy billionaire romance, I think it was named. And now it seems to be romantasy is the one. But thankfully, from what I know about it, that will be drifting off, and we can get back to perhaps more normal fantasy in 3 or 4 years. But anyway, with films, the box office figures are readily available, and you can see how many people watch certain movies. Visual media is also how the majority of the world consumes story. So as storytellers, we need to be au fait with that. And a simple dramatic illustration of that, if you read any books from Victorian times, so I'm thinking of the two that I'm thinking of are either the original of Les Miserables or Moby Dick, you'll find that they were written for a very different audience. That obviously in Victorian times there were no TVs, everything was in book format, and in those books you've got subchapters that read like, so in Les Miserables the subchapters on the construction of the sewers and how they were built and the history of the sewers, or in Moby Dick there is subchapters on stuff that wouldn't be out of place in a National Geographic, all about the whales and their habitats and what they eat and stuff like that. So now in contemporary storytelling we don't have that at all. The stories are much more hard-hitting and much more, there's no room to have a 20-page digression on something that's basically just background. What you've got to do now is you've got to paint that exposition with a well-chosen scene, and if it's not germane to the story, you've probably got to omit it altogether. So we do need to be very comfortable with visual media, and work out how we can translate that to the page, because that is how the majority of the world consumes story. I mean, book readers make up a small percentage of the audience, but nearly everybody in the world watches films, whether that's streaming films like Netflix, Disney Plus, any of those streaming servers, or at the cinema, or they watch TV series, and some of those TV series are much better than Hollywood films. Things like the first 5-6 seasons of Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, those kind of things. And so that's why I think those are the 3 reasons why I think we should analyze films. And just so you get a sense of something, and there's another important element about this. If you make that list of 50 films, even if you only get to 20 to start with, what you'll find is it tells you something about who you are as a writer. So I've made my list, and if you've seen either the hero's journey analysis I did of the first Harry Potter movie or the Hunger Games film, the other 8 films on this list probably won't surprise you that much. So there's Harry Potter 1, which I just mentioned, and there's the Hunger Games, also mentioned. The Matrix, Keanu Reeves film. Serenity, this is the only one where I really stepped out of the idea of picking big box office winners. But I chose Serenity anyway because it's an absolutely fantastic film. If you like science fiction of any sort, great film. Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, Catching Fire, Alien, the first Alien with Sigourney Weaver, 1979 one, The Prestige, and also The Fellowship of the Ring. So just seeing those 10 films and 10 films written down probably tells you, you can probably infer from that who I'm likely to be as a writer based on those things, because while there is some variety of genre and how the stories are told and stuff, there are a lot of elements that if I mix them together in a story, you wouldn't be remotely surprised if you saw me write in that vein. And you can do the same kind of analysis for yourself once you've got 10 or 20 stories written down. So closing out, because I don't want to talk for too long, I want to respect your time. I posted a video on story models, so coming back to the whole concept of story models in my short story series. I'll put a link to that in the description below this video, so you can go and read that, or watch that rather, if you need to know more about story models, need to get some kind of ideas on where to go and start with story models. My advice with story models is, once you've encountered a few, start with the story model that resonates the most with you, and then borrow things that you need that your story model perhaps doesn't have. Borrow from other models to create your own hybrid story model. That's certainly what I'm doing. If you've got any questions or comments on this, email me, paul@deliberate-practice.com. And I'm putting together a resource for aspiring and or frustrated fiction writers. You'll find it at that URL that's in front of you on the screen. I'll also have a link to this in the description, so go and check that out. If you've got any questions on that, then don't hesitate to email me and ask your questions. I try and be 100% honest and 100% transparent. If I don't think it's a fit for you, I'll tell you that. So go and check that out. Thank you for your time with this video, and I'll catch you in the next video.